In a small, quiet town in the Pacific Northwest, there was a college known for its focus on liberal arts and critical thinking. It wasn't one of those big name universities with towering buildings or famous alumni. Instead, it prided itself on being a place where ideas mattered more than money, where professors encouraged students to think deeply about the world around them. Among these professors was Dr. Evelyn Hartley, a woman who had spent nearly 2 decades teaching calculus to students who often groaned at the sight of equations but respected her nonetheless. One sunny afternoon, as Evelyn sat in her office grading papers, she opened her laptop to check the news during a break. Scrolling through headlines, something caught her eye. Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, was visiting their region as part of an outreach program aimed at fostering connections between Silicon Valley and local communities. According to the article, he would be giving a guest lecture at her very own college. At first, Evelyn felt indifferent. Tech executives visiting campuses wasn't exactly rare. Many came to talk about innovation, entrepreneurship, and all the ways technology was changing the world. But as she read further, her mood shifted. The topic of Sundar's lecture? The future of artificial intelligence. Evelyn scoffed audibly, leaning back in her chair. Artificial intelligence, she muttered under her breath. Another billionaire telling us how great tech is without addressing the harm it causes. To Evelyn, Silicon Valley represented everything wrong with modern society: unchecked power, disregard for privacy, and algorithms that reinforced existing inequalities. And Sundar Pichai, despite his humble beginnings in India, was now part of that system. Sure, he talked about accessibility and fairness, but did he really understand the consequences of what his company created? Her mind raced with thoughts. Here was this man, one of the most powerful people in the world, coming to her college to deliver a feel-good speech about AI. What if someone challenged him? Not with vague accusations or empty rhetoric, but with something concrete, something undeniable, something mathematical. An idea began to form in Evelyn's head, sharp and clear like the edge of a blade. She grabbed a notebook from her desk and started scribbling furiously. Within minutes, she had drafted a complex calculus problem designed not only to stump Sundar, but also to force him to confront the ethical dilemmas hidden within the algorithms he championed. The problem revolved around optimizing fairness in AI systems, a concept easier said than done. By the time she finished writing, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across her cluttered office. Evelyn leaned back, satisfied with her work. This wasn't just about embarrassing Sundar Pichai, though she wouldn't deny that prospect thrilled her. It was about making a statement. About showing everyone, students, colleagues, even Sundar himself, that abstract concepts like fairness couldn't be reduced to simple equations. That behind every line of code lay choices with profound human implications. Over the next few days, Evelyn refined her plan. She practiced explaining the problem aloud, imagining how she presented during Sundar's lecture. She rehearsed possible responses, preparing herself for anything from polite dismissal to outright hostility. Her colleagues, however, weren't so enthusiastic when she mentioned her intentions. "You're setting yourself up for failure," warned Dr. Marcus Reed, a history professor who shared lunch with her regularly. "Do you really think humiliating him will make a difference?" "It's not about humiliation," Evelyn replied firmly, though deep down, she knew that was part of it. "It's about accountability. If we don't challenge these people, who will?" Marcus shook his head, clearly unconvinced, but Evelyn didn't care. She believed in what she was doing, even if others doubted her. As the date of Sundar's visit approached, excitement and nerves began to build among the faculty and students. Flyers advertising the event appeared on bulletin boards across campus, promising insights into the cutting-edge technologies shaping our lives. For most attendees, it was simply a chance to hear from a global leader. For Evelyn, it was an opportunity to prove a point. On the morning of the lecture, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Students filed in early, eager to secure good seats. Professors mingled near the front, exchanging predictions about what Sundar might say, and somewhere in the crowd, Evelyn sat quietly, clutching her notes tightly in her hands. Her heart pounded as she waited for the moment when she'd step into the spotlight, not as a mere spectator, but as a challenger ready to shake things up. Little did she know, this confrontation would lead to far more than she ever anticipated. The day of Sundar Pichai's lecture had finally arrived, and the college auditorium buzzed with excitement. Students filled every seat, some balancing notebooks on their laps while others clutched pens, ready to jot down insights from one of the most influential figures in tech. Professors sat along the edges, observing the scene with quiet curiosity. Evelyn Hartley, however, wasn't there just to listen. She sat near the front row, her notebook gripped tightly in her hands. Her heart raced as she rehearsed what she would say when the moment came. Around her, whispers echoed through the room. Students speculated about what Sundar might discuss, professors exchanged theories about AI's future, and everyone seemed thrilled to have such a high-profile guest on campus. When Sundar walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. Dressed simply in dark pants, a button-down shirt, and sneakers, he exuded humility. He smiled warmly, waving briefly before stepping up to the podium. His voice was calm but confident as he began speaking. "Thank you all for welcoming me here today," he said, pausing to let the applause fade. "It's always inspiring to visit places like this college, where critical thinking and innovation are valued so deeply." Evelyn listened intently, her jaw tightening slightly. As Sundar spoke about Google's mission to organize the world's information, she found herself growing restless. When he moved on to artificial intelligence, describing it as a tool capable of solving global challenges, her frustration boiled over. His words sounded polished, almost rehearsed, brushing aside the darker realities of technology. Then, midway through his talk, Evelyn saw her chance. Without hesitation, she stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. The sudden noise drew everyone's attention. Silence fell over the room as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. "Excuse me, Mr. Pichai," Evelyn said firmly, her voice steady despite the nerves coursing through her. "I appreciate your vision for AI, but I wonder if you've thought about how these systems can perpetuate inequality." Sundar paused, clearly surprised by the interruption. For a brief moment, the room felt tense. Then, with a polite smile, he nodded. "That's an important question," he replied. "Please, go ahead." Encouraged by his response, or perhaps driven by adrenaline, Evelyn pressed forward. "Let's get specific," she continued, holding up her notebook for emphasis. "Here's a calculus problem for you. Suppose we're designing an algorithm to allocate resources fairly across different communities. How do we ensure fairness without sacrificing efficiency? Can fairness even be quantified?" She paused, letting her challenge hang in the air. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some students exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to admire Evelyn's boldness or worry about the awkwardness unfolding before them. Others leaned forward, intrigued by the unexpected twist. Sundar remained calm, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "Fairness is indeed complex," he acknowledged after a moment. "But perhaps we can explore this together after my presentation. There's still more I'd like to share with everyone here." Evelyn hesitated. Part of her had expected resistance or defensiveness. Instead, Sundar's composure left her momentarily disarmed. Reluctantly, she nodded and sat back down, feeling both triumphant and uneasy. As Sundar resumed his talk, the energy in the room shifted. While many attendees were focused on his slides and anecdotes, others kept stealing glances at Evelyn, whispering speculations about what might happen next. Would she push harder during the Q&A session? Had she succeeded in making her point, or had Sundar's poise deflected her critique entirely? For Evelyn, sitting there in silence felt strange. She had prepared herself for confrontation, expecting resistance or dismissal. Instead, Sundar's willingness to engage left her momentarily unsure of what to do next. Yet beneath her uncertainty, a flicker of curiosity began to grow. Perhaps this encounter wouldn't end in humiliation after all, or at least not in the way she had imagined. By the time Sundar concluded his presentation, the audience was buzzing with anticipation. When he invited questions, dozens of hands shot up immediately. But Evelyn stayed seated, her mind racing as she reconsidered her strategy. This wasn't just about proving a point anymore. It was about finding answers to questions that mattered deeply to her, and maybe even learning something in the process. As Sundar scanned the room, his gaze landed on Evelyn. With a slight nod, he gestured for her to join him on stage. "Let's tackle that equation together," he suggested, his tone warm yet challenging. For the first time since standing up earlier, Evelyn felt genuinely unsure of what would come next. Whatever happened, one thing was certain. This interaction was far from over. As Evelyn made her way to the stage, the weight of hundreds of eyes on her was almost palpable. Her heart pounded in her chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. She had planned this moment meticulously, imagining Sundar Pichai squirming under pressure, struggling to answer her complex calculus problem. But now, standing face to face with him, she wasn't so sure how things would unfold. Sundar greeted her warmly as she approached the podium, extending a hand for a brief handshake. "Thank you for bringing up such an important topic," he said with genuine sincerity. His calm demeanor and inviting tone threw Evelyn slightly off balance. She had expected resistance or defensiveness, but here he was, treating her challenge not as an attack, but as an opportunity for dialogue. Evelyn nodded curtly, still clutching her notebook like a shield. "Let's dive into it then," she replied, opening the book to reveal the intricate equation she had crafted. Using the microphone, she explained the problem aloud, ensuring the entire audience could follow along. "Imagine we're designing an algorithm to allocate resources across different communities," she began, pointing to variables scrawled across the page. "How do we optimize fairness while maintaining efficiency? And more importantly, can fairness even be measured mathematically?" To his credit, Sundar didn't flinch. He studied the equation carefully, nodding slowly as if processing its layers. Then, with surprising confidence, he picked up a marker and turned to the whiteboard behind them. "This is fascinating," he admitted, sketching out parts of the equation as he spoke. "Fairness is inherently subjective, which makes quantifying it incredibly challenging. But let's break it down." What followed was nothing short of remarkable. Instead of dismissing the problem as too theoretical or impractical, Sundar engaged fully. He started by acknowledging the limitations of algorithms, explaining how biases embedded in datasets could skew outcomes no matter how well-intentioned the design. Then, he proposed adjustments to Evelyn's equation, introducing new variables that accounted for systemic inequities. His explanations were clear and accessible, bridging the gap between advanced mathematics and real-world implications. For Evelyn, watching him work through the problem felt surreal. She had prepared herself for arrogance or evasion, yet here was Sundar, collaborating with her as though they were colleagues rather than adversaries. At one point, he paused and looked at her directly. "Does this align with what you envisioned?" he asked, genuinely seeking her input. Caught off guard, Evelyn hesitated before responding. "It's close," she admitted reluctantly. "But I think there's still a flaw in assuming we can define fairness universally. What works for one community might fail another entirely." Sundar nodded thoughtfully, clearly appreciating her critique. "You're absolutely right," he agreed. "That's why transparency and feedback loops are crucial when designing these systems. We need diverse voices involved, not just engineers, to ensure accountability." The conversation continued, shifting seamlessly between technical details and broader ethical considerations. As the two debated back and forth, the audience remained captivated. For many students, this was unlike anything they'd ever witnessed, a CEO grappling with tough questions alongside a professor who refused to back down. It wasn't just a clash of ideas. It was a demonstration of intellectual humility and mutual respect. By the time they wrapped up their discussion, nearly 20 minutes had passed. Sundar stepped back from the board, turning to address the crowd. "I want to thank Dr. Hartley for raising this critical issue," he said, gesturing toward Evelyn. "These are the kinds of conversations we need more of, not just within companies but across disciplines. Technology doesn't exist in a vacuum, and neither should our solutions." The auditorium erupted into applause, the sound reverberating through the space. Evelyn stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to feel. Pride? Frustration? Confusion? This wasn't how she had imagined the confrontation ending. She had set out to expose Sundar's blind spots, yet somehow they had ended up working together. As she returned to her seat, the whispers around her grew louder. Some students praised her boldness, while others marveled at Sundar's composure. One thing was certain: this day would be remembered long after the lecture hall emptied. For Evelyn, however, the experience left her unsettled. She had intended to humiliate Sundar, but instead, she found herself questioning her own assumptions. Was Silicon Valley really as monolithic as she believed? or were there leaders within it willing to listen and learn? These thoughts lingered in her mind as the event drew to a close, planting seeds of doubt that would soon blossom into something far greater. As the auditorium emptied after Sundar Pichai's lecture, Evelyn Hartley sat alone in her seat, staring at the equations still scribbled on the whiteboard. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: pride, confusion, and an unexpected sense of admiration. She had come to challenge Sundar, to expose what she saw as the flaws in Silicon Valley's approach to technology. But instead of crumbling under pressure, he had risen to the occasion with grace and intelligence. The way he handled her problem stayed with her long after the event ended. He didn't just throw out vague answers or dodge the tough questions. He engaged deeply, showing both mathematical skill and ethical awareness. More surprising was his willingness to admit limitations. When Evelyn pointed out that fairness couldn't be universally defined, Sundar agreed without hesitation. "There's no perfect solution," he had said. "But that doesn't mean we stop trying." That line stuck with Evelyn. It wasn't the response she expected from someone in his position. In her experience, powerful figures often dismissed criticism or tried to spin it into something positive for their image. Yet Sundar seemed genuinely interested in learning, not just from her, but from anyone willing to share a different perspective. Later that evening, Evelyn found herself unable to focus on grading papers or preparing for her next class. Instead, she opened her laptop and began researching Sundar's background. What she discovered complicated her black and white view of corporate executives. Articles highlighted his modest upbringing in India, where he grew up in a two-bedroom apartment with limited resources. Interviews revealed his passion for making technology accessible to underserved communities, a goal that aligned closely with her own values. Evelyn also stumbled upon stories about Google's efforts to address algorithmic bias, including initiatives led by teams of ethicists, engineers, and social scientists. While she knew these programs weren't perfect, and certainly not immune to criticism, they showed a level of self-awareness she hadn't anticipated. For the first time, Evelyn questioned whether her assumptions about tech giants were too simplistic. Maybe there were people within those companies who truly cared about doing the right thing. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft ping from her email inbox. Curious, she clicked on the notification and froze when she saw the sender's name: Sundar Pichai. The subject line read simply, "Thank you." Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the message. "Dear Dr. Hartley," the email began, "I wanted to thank you again for your insightful question today. Your challenge reminded me how important it is to confront difficult problems head-on, especially when they involve ethics and fairness. I'd love to continue this conversation and explore ways we can collaborate to address these issues. Please let me know if you're open to discussing further." Evelyn stared at the screen, rereading the words several times. This wasn't the kind of response she had anticipated. A part of her felt tempted to delete the email and move on, dismissing it as a PR tactic. But another part, the part that valued meaningful dialogue, couldn't ignore the sincerity in Sundar's tone. Over the next few days, Evelyn wrestled with what to do. Should she respond? Could she trust that Sundar's interest was genuine, or would engaging with him compromise her principles? These questions weighed heavily on her mind, but ultimately, curiosity won out. She drafted a reply, keeping her tone professional yet cautious. "Mr. Pichai," she wrote, "thank you for reaching out. I appreciate your openness to discussing complex topics like fairness in AI. If you're serious about collaboration, I'm willing to hear more about your ideas. However, I must emphasize that my priority is ensuring accountability, not advancing any particular agenda." To her surprise, Sundar responded within hours, inviting her to join a panel discussion hosted by Google. The event would bring together experts from various fields: engineers, ethicists, activists, and academics, to explore intersections between technology and society. It sounded intriguing, though Evelyn remained skeptical. Was this just another polished corporate event designed to improve Google's image? By the end of the session, Evelyn felt a spark of hope. Perhaps change wasn't impossible after all. Maybe, just maybe, bridging divides between academia and industry, between critique and collaboration, could lead to real progress. And as Sundar approached her afterward, thanking her once again for her contributions, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that this unusual partnership might yield something extraordinary. That evening, as Evelyn Hartley sat alone in her dimly lit office, the events of the day replayed in her mind like a film on repeat. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. For weeks, she had prepared herself for confrontation, for exposing Sundar Pichai's blind spots and holding him accountable. But instead of walking away victorious, she felt unsettled, as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted unexpectedly. The panel discussion hosted by Google had been eye-opening. Evelyn had walked into the sleek conference room expecting polished presentations and empty promises, but what she found was something far more meaningful. The participants weren't just corporate figureheads or tech enthusiasts. They were real people, engineers wrestling with ethical dilemmas, activists fighting for marginalized communities, and academics grappling with the societal implications of their research. Their passion was undeniable, and their commitment to addressing harm caused by technology gave her pause. Evelyn remembered one particular moment during the session when an activist from a grassroots organization shared a story about how biased algorithms had denied loans to low-income families. Her voice trembled with emotion as she described the human cost of seemingly neutral equations. It struck a chord with Evelyn, not because it was new information, but because it reinforced why she became a teacher in the first place. She had always believed knowledge could drive change, but sitting there among these diverse voices, she realized change required collaboration, not isolation. Sundar's presence lingered in her thoughts too. Throughout the day, he had listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and acknowledging gaps in his own understanding. There was no arrogance, no defensiveness, just a genuine desire to learn. It made Evelyn question whether she had underestimated him, or perhaps misunderstood the broader landscape of Silicon Valley entirely. As she reflected on this, her gaze fell on the email thread still open on her laptop. Sundar's words echoed in her mind. "I'd love to continue this conversation." At first, she had dismissed it as a polite gesture, a way to smooth over any lingering tension. But now, she wondered if there was more to it. Could someone in his position truly value input from a small-town calculus professor, or was she naive to think otherwise? Her phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the silence. It was a text from Dr. Marcus Reed, the history professor who often joined her for lunch. "How did it go?" he asked simply. Evelyn hesitated before typing a reply. "Complicated," she wrote finally. "But maybe. Hopeful." Hopeful. The word felt foreign yet strangely fitting. For years, Evelyn had worn cynicism like armor, convinced that corporations cared only about profit and power. Yet today, she had glimpsed something different, a willingness to listen, to adapt, to grow. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't enough, but it was a start. Over the next few days, Evelyn threw herself into revisiting old lectures and notes, rethinking how she approached topics like algorithmic bias and systemic inequality. She began incorporating stories from the panel discussion into her classes, sharing insights she had gained from engineers and activists alike. Her students noticed the shift immediately. "Dr. Hartley seems lighter," one of them remarked during a study group. Another added, "She's talking about solutions now, not just problems." Meanwhile, Evelyn continued exchanging emails with Sundar. They discussed potential projects, including co-authoring a paper exploring intersections between education, ethics, and technology, though part of her worried about appearing too eager, or worse, complicit. She couldn't deny the opportunity to amplify her message on a larger platform. If Sundar genuinely wanted to foster accountability, then perhaps working together could create ripples of change beyond either of their individual efforts. One night, as Evelyn prepared for bed, she paused to look out her window at the quiet college campus below. The streets were empty, save for a few scattered streetlights casting soft glows onto the pavement. For so long, she had seen herself as a lone voice shouting into the void. But now, she allowed herself to imagine something different, a chorus of voices, each contributing its unique perspective toward a shared goal. It wasn't easy letting go of old grudges or preconceived notions. Evelyn knew trust wouldn't come overnight, and skepticism would always be her default setting. But for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of optimism, a belief that progress, however slow and imperfect, was possible. As she turned off the light and climbed into bed, Evelyn whispered to herself, almost as if to seal the thought. Maybe I've been wrong about some things. And maybe that's okay. Evelyn Hartley's decision to collaborate with Sundar Pichai marked a turning point, not just in her career, but in how she viewed the world. Over the weeks that followed their initial meeting, they began working together on a project that combined Evelyn's expertise in mathematics and ethics with Sundar's deep understanding of technology and its societal impact. Their goal was ambitious: to create educational materials that would teach students not only advanced calculus, but also how these mathematical principles could be applied to address real-world challenges like algorithmic bias, resource allocation, and ethical AI design. Their partnership quickly bore fruit. Together, they co-authored a paper titled Equations of Equity, Bridging Mathematics, Ethics, and Technology, which explored the intersections of fairness, optimization, and human-centered design. The paper argued that while algorithms were powerful tools, they couldn't replace moral responsibility, and that educators played a crucial role in shaping future innovators who understood this balance. When it was published in a prestigious journal, it sparked widespread discussion among academics, technologists, and policymakers alike. Back at her college, Evelyn introduced new coursework inspired by their collaboration. Her classes now included modules on mathematics for social good, where students tackled problems rooted in real-life scenarios. For example, one assignment asked them to design an algorithm for distributing vaccines during a pandemic, considering factors like population density, income levels, and healthcare access. Another challenged them to identify biases in datasets used for hiring systems and propose ways to mitigate those biases mathematically. The response from students was overwhelmingly positive. Many had never thought about math as anything beyond abstract formulas and equations, but Evelyn's approach made the subject come alive. "I always hated calculus," admitted Mia Chen, a sophomore majoring in sociology, "but Dr. Hartley showed me how it can actually help people. That changed everything for me." Word of Evelyn's innovative teaching methods spread quickly. Other colleges began reaching out, asking for guidance on incorporating similar curricula into their programs. Within months, dozens of institutions adopted versions of her coursework, adapting it to fit their unique contexts. Even high schools started integrating elements of her lessons into advanced placement courses, ensuring that younger students were exposed to the ethical dimensions of STEM fields early on. Meanwhile, Sundar continued championing inclusive innovation within Google, often citing Evelyn's influence in interviews and speeches. During a keynote address at a global tech conference, he shared a story about their collaboration, emphasizing the importance of listening to diverse voices. "Dr. Hartley taught me something invaluable," he said, smiling warmly. "Sometimes, the toughest questions lead to the most meaningful answers." Critics weren't entirely convinced. Some accused Evelyn of selling out to big tech, arguing that partnering with someone like Sundar undermined her credibility as a critic. Others dismissed her efforts as superficial, claiming no amount of coursework could undo decades of systemic harm caused by Silicon Valley. But Evelyn shrugged off the negativity. "Progress isn't perfect," she told her students during a particularly heated classroom debate. "But staying stuck in anger gets us nowhere. If we're serious about change, we have to meet people halfway, even if it's uncomfortable." By the end of the academic year, Evelyn's reputation had grown beyond the confines of her small liberal arts college. She was invited to speak at conferences around the world, sharing her vision for education that bridged theory and practice. Her partnership with Sundar had opened doors she never imagined possible, allowing her to reach audiences far beyond her usual lecture halls. Yet, despite all the accolades and opportunities, Evelyn remained grounded. For her, the true measure of success wasn't fame or recognition. It was seeing her students develop critical thinking skills and a sense of responsibility toward the world. As she watched them grapple with complex problems and propose creative solutions, she felt a quiet pride knowing she had helped ignite their passion for making a difference. One evening, as Evelyn packed up her office after another long day of teaching, she paused to reflect on how far she'd come. What started as an attempt to humiliate Sundar Pichai had transformed into something far greater, a testament to the power of dialogue, humility, and collaboration. Though their paths might diverge in the future, Evelyn knew their partnership had left an indelible mark, not just on her life, but on countless others who would benefit from the ripple effects of their work. Years passed, and the impact of Evelyn Hartley and Sundar Pichai's unlikely collaboration continued to grow, spreading far beyond the walls of her small liberal arts college. What began as a single lecture hall confrontation had evolved into a movement, a quiet but powerful shift in how people thought about the intersection of mathematics, ethics, and technology. Their partnership became a case study in leadership courses, cited as an example of how constructive conflict could lead to meaningful progress. Meanwhile, Sundar Pichai continued advocating for responsible innovation within Google and beyond. His speeches often referenced the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration, urging tech companies to engage with critics rather than dismiss them. He frequently mentioned Evelyn by name, calling her a catalyst for change, and acknowledging how her challenge had reshaped his perspective. Together, they co-founded an initiative aimed at fostering dialogue between academia and industry, bringing together professors, activists, and corporate leaders to tackle pressing issues like digital privacy, algorithmic bias, and equitable access to technology. The ripple effects of their work reached unexpected places. In rural India, where Sundar himself had grown up, schools began incorporating elements of Evelyn's coursework into their STEM programs. Teachers translated her materials into local languages, ensuring that students from underserved communities had access to the same tools as those in elite institutions. One teacher wrote to Evelyn directly, thanking her for empowering his students to dream bigger. They see themselves not just as users of technology, he explained, but as creators who can shape its future. Back home, Evelyn noticed changes closer to her own community as well. Local businesses started reaching out to her college, seeking advice on implementing fair hiring practices or designing inclusive products. A nearby startup even hired several of her former students after hearing about their ability to think critically and ethically. These successes reinforced Evelyn's belief that education could be a force for good, a way to equip people with the skills and values needed to navigate an increasingly complex world. Despite the praise and recognition, Evelyn remained humble. She often reminded her students, and herself, that real change took time. "We're planting seeds," she would say during lectures. "Some will grow quickly, others may take years, but every effort matters." Still, there were moments when she allowed herself to feel proud. Watching a group of high schoolers present their project on reducing food waste through optimized supply chains brought tears to her eyes. Knowing that her ideas had inspired young minds to solve real-world problems filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. As for Sundar, his relationship with Evelyn deepened over time, evolving from professional collaboration to genuine friendship. Though their lives remained vastly different, he running one of the largest companies in the world, she teaching calculus in a modest college town, they stayed in touch, exchanging emails and occasional phone calls. Sundar never forgot the day Evelyn stood up to challenge him, viewing it as a turning point in his journey toward greater empathy and accountability. For Evelyn, Sundar's openness to criticism served as a reminder that even the most powerful figures could learn and grow if given the chance. Their story captured public attention, inspiring countless others to embrace difficult conversations. Journalists wrote articles about their partnership, highlighting how two seemingly opposite individuals had found common ground. Documentaries featured interviews with both Evelyn and Sundar, showcasing their shared commitment to creating a better future. Even Hollywood expressed interest in adapting their tale into a film, though neither agreed to participate. "Our story isn't about us," Evelyn told reporters firmly. "It's about what happens when we choose to listen instead of shutting each other down." By the time Evelyn announced her retirement from teaching, her legacy was undeniable. Colleagues threw her a farewell party, filling the room with laughter, gratitude, and heartfelt speeches. Former students flew in from around the country to thank her for changing their lives. As she looked out at the sea of faces, Evelyn felt overwhelmed, but in the best possible way. That night, as she sat alone in her now empty office, she opened a notebook and began drafting the first chapter of her memoir. Titled Equations of Empathy it would tell the story of how a fiery professor and a tech CEO came together to spark a revolution, not through grand gestures, but through small acts of courage, curiosity, and collaboration. And as she wrote, Evelyn smiled, knowing that their work would continue to inspire long after she was gone. Years after Evelyn Hartley's retirement, her story, and the unlikely partnership with Sundar Pichai, remained a beacon of hope for those seeking to bridge divides and drive meaningful change. What had started as a confrontation in a college auditorium had grown into something far greater, leaving an indelible mark on education, technology, and society at large. Meanwhile, Sundar Pichai continued championing initiatives inspired by his partnership with Evelyn. At Google, he launched programs aimed at fostering inclusivity in tech, from scholarships for underrepresented students to workshops teaching ethical AI design. He often referenced Evelyn's influence in interviews, emphasizing the importance of listening to critics and embracing diverse perspectives. Change doesn't happen in isolation, he once said during a TED talk. It happens when we come together, not despite our differences, but because of them. Their work also left a lasting impact on education systems globally. Schools and universities adopted versions of Evelyn's curriculum, integrating ethics into STEM fields in ways that resonated with younger generations. Students who grew up learning about fairness and algorithms went on to create startups focused on social good, develop tools to combat misinformation, and advocate for policies protecting digital privacy. Many credited Evelyn's teachings with shaping their worldview. She taught me that math isn't just about solving problems. It's about asking the right questions, one graduate said during a commencement speech. Even Hollywood eventually adapted their story into a film titled Asterisk, The Equation of Us Asterisk. Though Evelyn initially resisted the idea, fearing it might oversimplify their complex relationship, she ultimately agreed after meeting the filmmakers. If this inspires even one person to challenge the status quo, she told them, then it's worth it. The movie was a critical and commercial success, earning praise for its nuanced portrayal of two individuals finding common ground despite vastly different backgrounds. Back in her quiet hometown, Evelyn watched the ripple effects unfold with quiet satisfaction. Letters poured in from strangers around the world, thanking her for inspiring them to pursue careers in education, activism, or technology. Teachers shared photos of classrooms decorated with posters based on her lessons. Activists cited her name during protests against algorithmic bias. Each message reminded her that their efforts had touched lives far beyond what either she or Sundar could have imagined. Though they no longer worked together directly, Evelyn and Sundar remained occasional correspondents, exchanging updates and celebrating milestones. When Sundar announced plans to fund a global center for ethical AI research, he invited Evelyn to serve as an advisor. Despite initial hesitation, she joked that she didn't belong in such lofty circles. She accepted, knowing her voice could help shape the project's direction. Together, they ensured the center prioritized accessibility, transparency, and accountability. As Evelyn grew older, she reflected on the legacy she'd leave behind. It wasn't fame or accolades that mattered most to her. It was the knowledge that she had made a difference. On quiet evenings, she would sit by her window, sipping tea and flipping through old notebooks filled with equations, lecture notes, and memories. She thought about the students whose lives she had touched, the colleagues who had challenged her thinking, and the man who had once been her adversary but became a friend. One day, while organizing her belongings, Evelyn stumbled upon a faded photograph taken shortly after Sundar's visit to her college. In it, she stood beside him on stage, both smiling despite their earlier clash. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel proud, not just of what they had achieved together, but of how they had shown the world that change begins with courage, curiosity, and empathy. When Evelyn passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. Sundar released a heartfelt statement, calling her a force of nature and one of the most important mentors I've ever had. Her former students organized memorials, sharing stories of how she had changed their lives. And somewhere in a small classroom in India, a group of children solved a math problem designed to teach them about fairness, all thanks to the woman who believed numbers could tell a deeper story. Evelyn Hartley's life proved that even the smallest actions could spark monumental change. Through her courage to confront, her willingness to learn, and her dedication to teaching, she showed the world that equations weren't just about numbers, they were about people. And though she was gone, her legacy lived on, carried forward by everyone she had inspired to make the world a little fairer, one calculation at a time.